Good morning. Title of the sermon, the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians, Paul's poetic revelation on love, permanence, and seeing beyond the veil. So the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians, probably among the most quoted scriptures in the entire Bible, at many weddings, quite a few funerals, and it is beloved. Begin with just reading it. It is written by Paul, the Apostle Paul, and it's written in a poetic form. And so let's sort of take a look at it as a poem. Paul writes, and this is the entire chapter, by the way, "If I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to move mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body to the flames but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. But as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. For we know only in part, and we prophesy only in part. But when the complete comes, the partial will come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. For now, we see in a mirror dimly, but then we will see face to face. Now we know only in part. Then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. These things will last forever, faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love." Well, this poetic poem, this chapter on love, there's a lot to it, obviously. Just want to look at three pieces of it. We'll start with love, literally the word love. So there are four main Greek words for love. All four are found in the scriptures. Storge is affection. Philia is friendship or reciprocal love. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Eros is sensual love or that erotic attraction. And agape is unconditional love, sacrificial love, sometimes thought of as transcendent love. Now, what's interesting is that these four words were there at the time of Jesus, but the last one was hardly ever used. But it gets picked up by Jesus, and it gets picked up by the New Testament. And it becomes this core word used to talk about the center of what we are about. So every place here where you see love, it's always agape. Beloved, let us love one another, because love is from God. Everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, for God is agape. God is love. Those words from 1 John 4, pretty amazing words. What is it saying? The substance of God is love. The substance of Christ is love. The substance of the Spirit is love. Another passage that deals with agape. This is my commandment, Jesus says, that you agape one another, as I have agaped you. No one has greater agape than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. And then Jesus said, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. And so for us, here God is love, but now for us, the substance of faith, the substance of life, the substance of holiness. It's all agape, love. So this word love becomes at the core of what it means to follow Jesus. It refers to the substance of God. It refers to the substance of faith. Paul adds some details to this. At the very end, he says, 3 things will last forever: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. So I just want to take a moment and think about this idea of lasting forever. Or permanence. Permanence. It's a pretty important concept in the New Testament. In these words for time, chronos, which is chronological time, used 53 times. Kairos, which is God's time, is used 87 times. But the word eternity, eon, forever, is used 71 times. It's an important part of our faith, this idea of permanence, lasting forever. It's that Greek word, eon, or in the Old Testament, there's also a word, olam, and it means eternity, everlasting, forever, end of time. It shows up for Jesus not only in terms of sort of an eternity that may be way out there, but it's somehow connected to our lives. In the story of the woman of the well in John 4, Jesus said, "The water that I give will become in you a spring of water gushing up to eternal life." The woman said to Jesus, "Sir, give me this water." So I want to think about permanence, forever, for a moment, okay? So it's actually been a pretty important concept for me in my life. And so I grew up in Alameda, and there are these 2 epic monuments to permanence, the 2 bridges that go to San Francisco. That's the Bay Bridge, but you can also see in the back, much smaller, the Golden Gate Bridge. So these 2 bridges. And there's not as many pictures of the building of the Bay Bridge, but this is one of them. And that's going up. They were built at the same time. That's right. And they opened 6 months apart. There's the completed Bay Bridge. Here's the building of the Golden Gate Bridge. There's a lot more pictures of this. I have a couple of enlarged pictures that we have on our walls at home. I love that bridge. It's a suspension bridge where they took individual strands and suspended them. They are stringing them up, and then they bound them all together. 27,582 strands. That's right. Onto that big cable. By the way, one of the dumber things I did in my youth was I climbed up that cable, not to the very top, but up to the roadway from the bottom. There it is being built. There's the cables as they are laid, and then they started building the roadway, and there it is completed. One of the great engineering feats of all time. That's right. Permanence, right? These 2 bridges. So this is opening day of the Bay Bridge in 1936. It opened first, and that's my family. In fact, the man with the hat, a little bit on the right side, is my grandfather, who died before I was born. He died in 1956. So I never met him, but this picture, he's wearing a hat, and the story goes that it was windy on that day, and on the way back, his hat was going to blow off, so he had to carry his hat. He always wore a hat, and evidently a seagull pooped, and it landed on his head. And so 6 months later, when the Golden Gate Bridge opened up, he didn't want to go. So my family wasn't there on the Bay Bridge opening, but they were there on the other. However, this idea of permanence, right? These bridges that are built, they're some of the greatest engineering marvels to last for a long, long time, right? Great permanence. Well, that section of the bridge is gone. Yeah, up until about 8 years ago, 9 years ago, that was still there being used, but then they replaced it with this. That's right. So it's gone. Yeah. So I can't go to that place anymore. I can't drive past it. It no longer is there. And some of you know this story. On the 50th anniversary of the Golden Gate Bridge, they opened it up and they said anybody, just like opening day back in 1937, in 1987, anyone who wanted to could go. And, and about 500,000 people came and were on the bridge at that time. And, the bridge, there it is. It has a normal arc. It's not flat. You can kind of see a little bit of the arc, but there's not too much of it there. And that's because there were so many people. Believe it or not, people everywhere weighs about 5 times as much as cars and trucks, bumper to bumper. And there was an engineer at UC Berkeley looking at this, and he didn't see the normal arc of the bridge. And he realized that it was in danger. And he did his own little calculations, and he found out it was within a slight margin of error of collapsing. And so this bridge that was built with great permanence almost collapsed on its 50th anniversary. Yeah. So strength, permanence, durability, yes, it survived. It might have been close, but it survived, right? But eternal? Forever? Not even close, right? I mean, the things that we think of as being permanent are not eternal. Not even close. Yeah. Even the pyramids, we often think of them as perhaps the most permanent structures ever built. And yet, the pyramids are eroding away. And one day, they too will be gone. So this idea of finding permanence, love lasts forever. And how do you make sense of that? How can that be? Well, that leads us to the last part. Paul talks about catching a glimpse of where love is permanent, or how it is permanent, in a mirror dimly, of seeing beyond the veil. What we might think of as like a heavenly realm, or a realm beyond the physical realm, where things can be permanent in a world where nothing that we can make is permanent. He writes, "For now, we see in a mirror dimly, but then we will see face to face. Now I know only in part, but then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known." So Paul makes reference to the world that we know, the world of impermanence, the world of bridges that almost collapse, and even of pyramids that will one day be gone. But it points to something beyond, a world that is beyond our material world that we live in. Yeah. A world that is beyond the not even close reality that we live with. Again, there's a little bit of the reflections that go through my mind. So where do you find permanence? How can you have eternity? Where does it fit? Where does it fit? Is it simply totally beyond this world, or is there a way to make sense of it? So the biblical concept of God as eternal would point toward God being outside time and space. One of the great discoveries in the history of science was Einstein's theory of relativity. And one of the things that theory presupposes is that actually space and time don't go on forever. They're all bound up together, and you can kind of think of it as part of the creation. It's part of the universe. And the gray part in this picture, that's space and time. That's right. And in that reality, it works a certain way. And yet what Einstein's theory presupposes, the theory of special relativity, it linked time and space into a unified four-dimensional reality, and that pointed toward the existence of a reality beyond space and time. That's right. So one of the implications of relativity theory is not only that space and time is bound together, but there is the existence of that which is outside of space and time, which is often where we think of as God. In fact, that's the biblical definition of God. God is not part of the creation. God is outside of it. But it's a special way of understanding outside of it. It's not outside of it in a geographic sense or even in a time-bound sense. It's a God who is able to transcend. And so to be present, a God who can be present, a spirit that can be present, and yet it's not bound by space and time. And so it brings that eternity into our lives. So where does Paul get this idea that we can catch a glimpse beyond the veil? Well, one of the things you find when you look at Paul is that Paul had a series of mystical experiences, epiphanal experiences, maybe even near-death experiences. And this is one of my favorites. Some of you know that I quote this a lot. It's from Paul's second letter to the church in Corinth. We're reading from his first letter, but this is his second letter, but he makes reference to something that actually happened probably very early on in his life as following Jesus. He writes, I, Paul, know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. Whether it was in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. He was caught up to paradise. And he heard inexpressible things. Paul had an experience. By the way, this was incredibly important to him. In this same passage, he goes on to talk about a thorn in his side. The most difficult thing that he had to deal with in life was this thorn in the side. Doesn't tell us what it was, but he wrestled with it, he struggled with it. But what allowed him to live and to serve and to be faithful was this experience of the third heaven. By the way, isn't it amazing? There's something incredibly authentic about this where he says, whether it was in the body or out of the body, I do not know, God knows. He had this experience where he caught a glimpse of the other side, beyond the veil, or the heavenly realm, or outside of space and time. And maybe it happened when he was sleeping, maybe when it happened he was just sitting on a bench. But afterwards he thought about it, and he thought, man, that was real. That was as real as reality can be, and I was there. And then he thought about it, he says, well, I wonder if my body was there, or was my body here laying on the bed or sitting on the bench? And he acknowledges he doesn't know. Yeah. It seemed like I was completely there, but I don't really know if my body was there or not. That's the authentic expression of, let me tell you, an epiphanal experience. So this idea of love and permanence and seeing beyond the veil, that all come together, that are all pieces of this epic poem. And I've shared with you these three things that they stand out to me. They speak to me on a regular basis, and especially right now. We're living in a difficult time. We're living in a time where people are often saying there needs to be more love. We're not living out our lives on this planet right now with as much love and care as we might like to see. We're also dealing with a lot of death. And so that idea of life and death and what lies beyond is close to home. And the things that seem so permanent don't seem as permanent right now, right? Including our own existence. And so This passage brings these things together. And it does so in a way that really draws upon almost the language of poetry. And so as I was thinking about how this passage speaks to me, as it speaks to love, as it speaks to permanence, as it speaks to seeing beyond the veil, of catching a glimpse of that which is outside of space and time, the realm of God, I found myself drawn to a number of poetic statements that try to capture this idea of love. St. Augustine writes, "Love is the beauty of the soul." Robert Browning says, "Take away love, and our earth is a tomb." Gandhi writes, "Where there is love, there is life." Billy Graham said, "Jesus said to those who followed him, 'By this all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Without love, we are nothing. When Christ comes in, love comes in, and love shines forth." Teilhard de Chardin writes, "Someday, after mastering the winds, the waves, the tides, and gravity, we will harness for God the energies of love. And then, for a second time in the history of the world, man will have discovered fire." And Emily Dickinson, "Unable are the loved to die, for love is immortality." And this last one, a quote that you've heard me share many times before, because I find it to be at the very essence of what it's all about, what our faith is about, what God is about, what love is about, what life is about. It comes from Julian of Norwich. "And all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well." So as I was researching this, I was looking for poems, and of course this one came up as I typed in love and permanence and seeing beyond the veil. I'm familiar with her, and as I looked at that, I was surprised to discover that a book just came out by Matthew Fox entitled "Julian of Norwich: Wisdom in a Time of Pandemic and Beyond." And so what Matthew Fox noted was that Juliana of Norwich, guess when she lived? She lived during the bubonic plague, or the Black Plague. That's right. She lived from 1346 to 1416, and the Black Plague was from 1346 to 1353. I didn't get the last part of that. And of course, her most famous quote that you just heard is, "All will be well." Yeah. "All will be well, and all shall be well, and in all manner of things shall be well." And that quote has some power, especially in difficult times. That's what it's saying, that there's a wellness that God provides, and beneath that wellness, there's a wellness. And beneath that wellness, no matter what should happen, in all manner of things, regardless of what should happen, there is a wellness. Joanna of Norwich, she was an anchoress, and what that meant was that she lived her life in solitude. She lived the last 40 years of her life. She almost died, and she had this wild sort of like Paul, whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know, experience of the third or fourth or fifth heaven, whatever. And she lived the last 40 years of her life in a small cell in solitude, except for her cats. She's sometimes referred to as the patron saint of cats because that's the only other person she was with. And she wrote down what she experienced. And this was her description of what she saw when she saw beyond the veil. In her experience, which was probably a near-death experience because she was very, very close to death, and it was during the plague. during the plague that this happened, and she had this experience of God. And what she described was that in this, she found God's love. And in this, she found that which was eternal. And that's what she experienced when she saw beyond the veil. Kind of runs a lot parallel to what Paul experienced. And so as we take this gift of Paul, we take these words as a reminder, as another poetic expression of what 1 Corinthians 13, and all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. For the pandemic and beyond, the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians, Paul's poetic revelation on love, permanence, and seeing beyond the veil. Amen.